Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, What Millennial Women Want and How to Reach Them. I'm your moderator, Jackie Sass from Merkle's marketing team. To lead today's webinar, we're joined by three industry experts, Dalton Dornay, SVP of Marketing at Merkle Americas, Alyssa Leonard, President at Levo, and Patrice Croce, VP of Marketing at Express. And now I'll hand things over to Dalton to get us started.
Great, thanks, Jackie. So we're going to talk a little bit about the research that we recently did with Levo, talk a little bit about how we did the research, some highlights from the findings, and then we're really going to jump into the Q&A with Patrice. As we did the practice run for this last week, I found her answers absolutely fascinating, and so we're trying to give as much time to the conversation as possible. So feel free to kind of use that Q&A button and get your questions in. Just at a very high level, we launched some research on International Women's Day around why millennial women buy. And this is done based on the Levo database of over 884 millennial women who responded to this. And then what we did is we added on Merkle's data source product, which has thousands of attributes on an individual level to kind of give a little richer context as to why these women were motivated to do the things that they were doing. We wanted to start off with a little poll, and so this is very easy to do. For those of you who are watching the webinar, you just click the button and we'll start to see the results populate. But how many of you are currently targeting millennial women as part of your strategy, just to get a little bearings of who's on the line and where people are with like leveraging this segment as an audience? Okay. Great. So far it looks like a majority of the people on the line are already using this as an audience and targeting. That's wonderful. The next poll we wanted to do is just to kind of get a little pulse on sort of how mature you are on leveraging this audience. So, do you treat this audience as one? Do you use rules to define the customer communications around them? Are you using segmented audiences or personas to guide messaging and communications? Are you using marketing automation to really manage this for you? And are you actually using PII or personal identifiable information to integrate this channel into your media mix? So go ahead and let us know where you are on the spectrum. Okay, great. So it looks like we have some people sort of in the early phases of kind of treating this audience as kind of one audience, and then some people who are really starting to segment on it a little bit more, which is great. So why did we look at this segment? So obviously, we know that women control or influence almost 85% of the overall U.S. spending power, and millennials represent the largest spending power of any generation. So it's sort of a double whammy of why millennial women really deserved a deeper look in terms of what motivates them to do the things that they do. And as Merkle really specializes in people-based marketing, it's not only about targeting people at an individual level, it's really also about understanding at an individual level what makes them tick and what motivates them. And so that's really why we partnered with Levo in doing this research. One of the things that really jumped out at me from this was that, this segment is an economic powerhouse. They have over 170 billion in annual spending power, which is just massive. And then if you think about this on a more granular level, they're also the chief earners and spenders. So nearly 50% of this demographic are breadwinners, which is pretty shocking, especially when you think about how that might relate to previous generations. Interestingly, they also have, once you get to like the $50,000 to $75,000 sort of earning range for annual salaries and above, you'll see that this segment is actually earning more than the average Americans in that segment. They're spending at a much higher velocity. So in fact, the top 60% of millennial women who are spending almost 20% more at any given time compared to the rest of the U.S. In addition to that, they're spending almost 25% more on those purchases. So not only are they spending more frequently, they're actually spending at a higher average order value, which is really exciting for retailers to think about what that means for their business. This was absolutely, and I think Elisa would probably agree, like one of my favorite things that came out of this study is millennials kind of get a bad rap, and people say that's the handout generation, and they're not willing to put in the work to kind of get the things that they want. But what we found is, like, not only is that not true, that 80% of them are employed full-time. They're not lazy. On top of that, 40% have a side hustle, which there are various reasons for why they're working an additional job, whether that's a passion project. But for most of them, it's really to earn incremental income in order to enable them to make the purchases that they want to make. And, that's hard work on top of hard work, as we all know. On top of that, 81% occasionally indulge themselves. And so it's definitely a generation that's very willing to make indulgent purchases, treat themselves. But what's interesting is where I think some of the mythbusters comes in is people have often said about this generation that they're not as price conscious as other generations, and that really isn't true. In fact, most of them are looking for the best deal, and they really are looking for value, that value exchange, and that price consciousness is part of that decision. Interestingly, when you think about credit card use, 52% of them don't mind using credit cards, but it's really important to them that they feel that they have the ability to pay that off completely. So this is not a generation that's looking to pay off the bare minimum. And when you think about how this generation is coming into adulthood with more debt than previous generations have, whether that's from school or other places, they are actually more fiscally responsible than a lot of people would give them credit for. And so when you think about what that means in terms of a value exchange with them, they're willing to splurge, but they want to make sure they can afford it, and they're willing to work harder to get it. So those things are kind of coming together here. I'm going to hand it over to Elisa to kind of walk us through what they actually spend their money on.